in the dim silence of forgotten archives. Buried beneath dust from civilizations long erased, a manuscript emerged once so unsettling that early Christianity attempted to bury it forever. Its pages whisper of an arrival that would shake kingdoms and silence prophets. Yet what truly terrified ancient scribes was not the Antichrist himself, but where this figure would first appear a revelation that defied every tradition, every prophecy, every expectation believers carried for centuries. As we open this forbidden document, we step into a landscape where celestial warnings echo through time, where ink becomes a weapon, and where the truth lay hidden, not to protect us from evil, but to protect institutions from the shock this prophecy would unleash. Now, after more than 1,000 years, the manuscript's voice rises again. The manuscript begins not with signs in the sky or battles between angels, but with a deceptively calm observation. He will rise where the faithful least imagine. This ambiguity was intentional, crafted to create fear without providing clarity. Ancient church leaders believed the text sowed too much unrest among early followers who were already shaken by persecution and division. But now, when examined closely, the manuscript reveals coded geographers, layered metaphors, and celestial markers aligned with regions that no ancient theologian wanted associated with darkness. This prophecy doesn't point to the powers of the East or the empires of the North, but to a place considered incorruptible, a sanctuary immune to deception, and yet the manuscript insists that the first shadow will fall exactly there. To understand why this revelation was so dangerous, we must step back into the world of early Christianity, a time when doctrine was fluid, fragile, and fiercely contested. Competing gospels circulated, each claiming divine authority. Some manuscripts predicted cosmic battles, others offered mystical journeys into heaven and hell. But the manuscript we uncovered today dared to redefine the battlefield altogether. It proposed that evil would not rise from the fringes of society nor from pagan empires, but from within a structure claiming holiness. This was theological dynamite. If believers feared their enemies outside, the church maintained power. But if they feared corruption inside, the church risked collapse. Thus, the prophecy was sealed away, dismissed as heresy, and buried under centuries of silence. The manuscript describes the Antichrist not as a distant conqueror, but as a figure who learns to mimic virtue so perfectly that even the wise struggle to see the deception. It portrays him as charismatic, soft-spoken, and capable of invoking spiritual awe without performing a single miracle. According to the ancient text, his rise is so subtle that followers interpret his warnings as blessings, his ambition as devotion, his manipulation as divine purpose. While later traditions expected an obvious tyrant, this manuscript insisted that the greatest danger would come disguised as piety. This inversion of expectations terrified early church officials, because it implied that discernmental obedience was the true safeguard of the faithful. One of the manuscript's most haunting phrases describes a moment when the voice of heaven will fall silent in the place of greatest worship. Scholars believe this refers not to divine abandonment, but to spiritual blindness spreading across a community once known for purity. The prophecy warns that rituals will continue, songs will rise, prayers will echo, yet an emptiness will grow unseen beneath the surface. The manuscript portrays this silence as the first true sign that the Antichrist has stepped into the world not through dramatic events, but through a quiet shift in spiritual atmosphere. And it is exactly this subtlety that made the text too threatening to preserve. As we turn deeper into the manuscript, we encounter a series of geographical clues: mountains, described as bearing the weight of forgotten covenants, rivers compared to veins of ancient mercy, and cities referred to metaphorically as lamps in the fog, while some assume these markers point to regions long destroyed. A surprising number align with places still considered holy today. Yet the final line in this section overturns every assumption by declaring that the first revealing shall occur where truth is spoken but seldom lived. This was the line that forced early church councils to condemn the text. It implied hypocrisy at the heart of sacred institutions, a suggestion that threatened the authority of spiritual leadership itself. The manuscript includes a passage describing a mirror of false light that will captivate millions. Ancient scribes believed this referred to an ideology, a movement, or even a spiritual leader who mastered the art of appearing righteous. What made the prophecy especially dangerous was its insistence that this figure would arise not among outsiders, but among those who claimed divine mission. The text describes sermons filled with passion but lacking truth, promises of miracles without compassion, and teachings that appear profound yet leave the soul weakened. This portrait created fear not of outsiders, but of insiders, a direct challenge to the systems that preserved their own influence. Another troubling detail emerges in the manuscript's description of symbols. It speaks of a sign carried not on banners, but in hearts grown too weary to question. This warning suggests that the Antichrist's arrival is facilitated not by violence, but by complacency. When believers seek comfort instead of truth, when they trade discernment for convenience, they become vulnerable to deception. Early church authorities feared that such a message might turn followers against them, encouraging people to challenge leadership rather than obey. Thus, they labeled the manuscript to destabilizing, to preserve publicly. The manuscript also presents a chilling reinterpretation of prophecy timelines, challenging long-held expectations. Instead of wars and cataclysms signaling the Antichrist's arrival, it points to moments of peace, unity, and prosperity as the true danger zones. This inversion unsettled theologians who relied on fear-based teachings to maintain moral discipline. According to the text, the world will actually appear stable when the first shadow resists. People will feel hopeful, nations will experience renewal, and religious institutions will thrive. This calm surface, the manuscript warns, is the camouflage behind which the Antichrist begins his ascent. One of the manuscript's most controversial sections describes a teacher of light whose words enchant entire nations. He will not claim to be divine, nor will he openly oppose God. Instead, he will promote a diluted version of truth, one that feels uplifting but lacks substance. This figure's influence will shape culture, politics, and even spiritual identity. While some interpret this as metaphor, others believe the manuscript predicted a real historical moment. Early church leaders feared that people might misidentify influential religious figures as the Antichrist, fracturing unity. That fear alone was enough to suppress the text. The manuscript goes even further by warning that the Antichrist's earliest followers will be the confident, not the humble. This distinction challenged traditional teachings. Instead of sinners being the most vulnerable, it claimed that the self-assured, the ones who believe they cannot be deceived, will fall first. This idea directly undermined the authority of leaders who positioned themselves as immune to error. If believers accepted this teaching, the hierarchical structure of early Christianity could crumble. Thus, the prophecy was not just buried, it was dismantled, condemned, and erased from official doctrine. One of the manuscript's most powerful metaphors describes the world as a tapestry where threads of truth and deception intertwine. The text warns that followers must learn to examine the tapestry thread by thread, not trust the image at first glance. This emphasis on personal discernment contradicted the early church's reliance on centralized interpretation. Leaders feared that if people began questioning teachings independently, unity would disintegrate. Therefore, they labeled the manuscript spiritually dangerous not because it was false, but because it encouraged believers to think deeply. In its final section, the manuscript presents a revelation that still stuns scholars today. He shall appear where holiness is assumed, not where evil is expected. This overturns centuries of tradition that placed the Antichrist in foreign empires or hostile regions. Instead, the prophecy suggests his first influence will spread from a community considered untouchable. This line was the final strike, too volatile, too challenging, too direct. It implied that the greatest danger would not come from distant lands, but from places considered spiritually secure. The manuscript ends with a message of responsibility rather than fear. It urges believers to cultivate discernment, humility, and vigilance, not to obsess over the identity of the Antichrist, but to strengthen their own spiritual integrity. The final words, translated from a fading margin, read, "He rises where truth becomes habit, not practice." This haunting message became the justification for suppressing the manuscript. Early leaders feared that if the prophecy spread, people would scrutinize religious institutions and find them wanting. Now, centuries after its silence, the manuscript resurfaces with renewed urgency. Its warnings no longer threaten the power of ancient councils, but challenge us in a world where influence spreads faster than ever, where charisma can overshadow truth, and where institutions, spiritual or otherwise, not immune to corruption. As we rediscovered this forbidden prophecy, the question echoes through time. If the Antichrist appears where no one expects, are we truly prepared to recognize the first shadow when it falls? The answers lie not in fear, but in light, reclaimed, questioned, and lived with purpose.